Recording in progress. All right, greetings everyone watching this recorded or live. We're going to be talking about the golden age of Armenian history. This is the period where Armenians became literate. They developed the alphabet, and because of that, they're able to record history. They're able to pass down from one generation to the next what great deeds they've done in the history, how to read the Bible specifically. And what does that mean for everything else down the line when you have literacy? It's interesting, we take books and reading for granted, but we have to kind of view a book and the ability to create an alphabet similar to creating a computer. It is revolutionary technology. And it was technology that was created during this period that ushered in the golden age of Armenian intellectual thought. To put it in perspective, when the Armenians developed the alphabet in 401, Europe was filled with barbaric people slaughtering others. Like, just to put it bluntly, I don't know if you ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, when the father is talking about how Europeans were swinging from trees because the Greek philosophy was so elevated in the 4th century BC. Armenians have this sense of being intellectual, educated, literate people very early on. And a Christian one on top of it, which makes it very unique because its literacy was specifically created for its Christianity. So before we jump in, the main historian, the father of history and also poetry in the Armenian tradition, is a guy named Moses Koronatsi, or Moses of Qran. He was writing around 481. He's a disciple of Mesrop Mashtots and Saint Sahak. And he wrote this back then. And he was a historian that traced Armenian history all the way back from Haigna, the guy I'm named after, the father of the Armenian people, all the way to the 5th century where he's writing. He takes a lot of the oral traditions that were passed down and creates this 3-volume work talking about Armenian history. And in it, he talks about, although we are a small nation and of limited numbers and lacking in strength and often overcome by foreign kingdoms, yet in our lands there have been many adventurous deeds done which are worthy of recording and remembering. 1700 years later, this is still the case. We're a small nation, limited of number, lacking in strength, often conquered by foreign countries, yet we're still around and we have stories that are worth sharing. So this whole 3-part series we're doing is honoring this legacy of Armenian history. So let's begin, though, by linking the Armenian story with the Bible. The Armenian scriptures testify, the Armenian tradition testifies to that Saint Bartholomew and Thaddeus were the 2 apostles that brought Christianity to the Armenian people. Direct link to Jesus Christ. And in the Bible, Nathaniel is the guy we read in the Gospel of John. People believe that he's the same person that's listed as Bartholomew. The belief is that that could be his last name, Bartholomew, son of a farmer, and Nathaniel is his first name. Jesus calls him in John chapter 1. And then the second person, who's known to be the person who drops the seed of Christianity in the Armenian people, is Judas, son of James. Now there's 2 Judases in the 12 disciples. This one is not Iscariot. I want to make that very clear. It's not Iscariot. The church didn't remember him as a Judas, son of James, but they just called him Thaddeus. And it's through Thaddeus where the current leaders of the Armenian church claim their authority from, the line of Thaddeus, the apostolic see, just like the Catholic Pope claims his authority from Saint Peter. The Armenian tradition claims its authority through Saint Thaddeus. Now, we've talked about this in depth in other Bible studies, and we have theological differences, obviously, but it's important to know that where the history is coming from. And because of this history, that is why the Armenian church, we should not call the mother church Orthodox. It's actually apostolic. Armenian apostolic. And an apostolic person is simply someone who's sent. The word apostle is someone who's sent to go preach the gospel. It's very evangelical, the word. But over time, these labels have turned into different institutions. But at the core, it means to be sent and to share the gospel. And the link with the Armenian people is Thaddeus and Bartholomew. So jump 300 years later, you don't really have Armenian culture being Christianized in mass until St. Gregory the Illuminator. Now, the story of St. Gregory the Illuminator is, there's two main primary sources that talk about it. It's hard to prove a lot of it, but the general themes of it are true. Like, there was this guy, Gregory, he converted the king, and Armenia became the first Christian nation, 301. But the narrative is that Gregory the Illuminator was thrown into a dungeon, Corfu. I've been down this place like 3 times. I've had some amazing prayer times there. One time I remember being there where there weren't that many tourists. You could visit it. It's right at the base of Mount Ararat. It's a very beautiful land. Some of the best watermelon I've ever had in the world is in this area. Corfu. It's the deep dungeon. And Gregory Illuminator was this guy who came from a military family. His father ended up killing the current leader of Armenia, King Turdot's dad. And when Gregory, who grew up with the Cappadocians, went to Armenia with the purpose of evangelizing the Armenians, when King Turdot found out that Gregory the Illuminator's dad was responsible for the assassination of his dad, he threw him in this dungeon for about 13 years. So for 13 years, the main evangelist of the Armenian people is in prison. 13 years in darkness. So while Gregory the Illuminator is in the dark in this dungeon, this deep pit, the king gets message actually from the Roman emperor that a very attractive nun is on their way over to you, Saint Hypsipyle. Saint Hypsipyle is with a group of nuns that are evangelistic in nature. They're a traveling missionary army of women evangelizing, led by a common Armenian named Gayene. They come. King Turdot wants Hypsipyle to be his wife or part of his concubine, depending on which version you're reading, but she refuses his advances, literally runs away and escapes, embarrasses him. The king gets so ticked off by this that he ends up killing her and most of the nuns. And because of his crazy, violent act, he was struck with something called lycanthropy. It's the belief that you're like a wolf, like an animal. If you read the Old Testament, King Nebuchadnezzar thinks he thinks he's a beast at one point. He's stricken with madness. And King Turdot's sister, the princess, has a dream that Gregory, who's stuck in this dungeon, could heal her brother. Ends up healing the brother. The king converts. He gets healed of his madness, of his insanity, and adapts Christianity as the national religion. And then a missionary movement begins where the princes, and the surrounding area begins to get evangelized by St. Gregory's ministry. So this is what makes Christianity the first Christian nation in 301 AD. And what I love about the evangelical effort, from the beginning, it wasn't just for the Armenians. Gregory began to have missionary centers for the Albanians and Georgians who were nearby. And then when we read about Meseret Mashtots, that same evangelical apostolic fervor continues to evangelize whoever they're around. It's not just for the Armenians, which is an important part of our history, to share the gospel with anyone who's we're encountering. So Lusa Vorchagan is the way you talk about apostolics, but it simply means belonging to the Church of St. Gregory the Illuminator, this guy who was in darkness, but had the light of Jesus Christ. That light was shared with the king. The king was illuminated, and that is what it's about to be a Christian. And this is biblical. Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but they will have the light of life." And Jesus also says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. To be Lusa Vorchigan, and not the I'm Orthodox versus Polkagon sense, but in the true sense of that word, it means to be a church of the Illuminator. It's not Illuminati here. This is illumination of Jesus Christ. It's to have the light of Jesus Christ in the truth of Jesus, period. No other truth. Jesus is the light. And to be on mission to share that light with the nations. We are a people set on Mount Ararat to be a light, to shine forth Jesus Christ. That is what it means to be Armenian Christian, period. So now, things seem to be going good, but you have to keep in mind, we're still a small nation, and currently our geopolitical situation is always awful, right? That's always been the case. We're thrown between the East and the West. We're thrown into being part of this empire, that empire. And even in 387, this was the case for the Armenians. We were literally thrown between the Byzantine or the Roman Empire continuation in the West and the Persian, the Sassanid Empire in the southern East. So Iran and what is now Western Turkey. We're thrown in the middle of these superpowers, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. You have Armenians living in both areas, both empires. So it's not an easy time for Armenians where they could just create an alphabet and have a national identity here. I think it's important to keep this in mind. It's actually in a dark moment of history where it's like, who are we? Where this golden age gets ushered in. So the fear is the Persians want to assimilate the Armenians into Persian culture. The Byzantines want to assimilate Armenians into Byzantine culture. And the Armenians are like, no, we're not Byzantines. We're not Persians. We're Armenians. We go back to Hagna Habet. We're different. And the leadership that's going to come through is going to solve this problem, because not only is it going to make sure a Christian identity is solidified, but also the Armenian identity is solidified, where Armenians could be Christians, not using biblical Greek or Aramaic, which is what they were using for their liturgies and for their Bible studies, but they could use a book to speak the truth of Christianity in a language they could understand, the vernacular. At its core, this is as evangelical as it gets. Speaking the Bible, speaking the truth about Jesus from the Bible in a way people can understand is at its core evangelical, Lusa Vorchigan, apostolic. It's making sure people get the message of Jesus Christ. So what did the Armenians do? Do they pick up a sword? No, they pick up the pen and they begin an amazing initiative to create an Armenian alphabet, to preserve an Armenian identity, to preserve a biblical Christian culture. It's not just winning numbers to Jesus, it's transforming the culture to Christ. That is discipleship. That's what the Great Commission is about. And the three key figures is Saint Sahak, the Catholicos, the leader, the patriarch, or as he's known in the history books that are not Armenian, Isaac the Great. There's also Saint Mesrop Mashtots, the linguistic genius who led an initiative to create the alphabet. And you have to give credit to King Ram Shabu. I have my cousin, his name is Ram Shabu. He commissioned this, he allowed this to happen. But the two saints are Sahak and Mesrop. They're on the stained glass at the Armenian Evangelical Church for a reason. They're that important. They capture and embody the Armenian Evangelical, Armenian Christian spirit. Now, I want to talk about Isaac of Armenia, or Isaac of, or Sahak, Saint Sahak, the Catholicos. He was born in Caesarea in 348. He had a very awesome lineage. His dad was Father Nerses of the Bartev family. He's a descendant of Gregory the Illuminator. Gregory the Illuminator's descendants took the title of Catholicos. It wasn't like they were celibate. They weren't. They had kids and they took on the mantle. It was there was some political aspect to this. It was like the Levites early on. And some of his descendants, just like in the Bible, just like in history, weren't the greatest of people, but some were amazing, like Saint Sahak. So his dad comes from this Gregory the Illuminator line, the Barkev family. And he happened to be classmates with Gregory of Nicaea, Gregory of Nazian, and Basil. These are the Cappadocian church fathers. Amazing, amazing individuals in church history. These are the guys who interpreted the scriptures where they made the first declarations that all slavery is wrong. Everyone has human rights. The earliest track record of universal declarations of equal rights, human rights, slavery is bad, come from these guys interpreting the Bible. Yet we don't think that what is now Eastern Turkey to be the Christian intellectual hub, but back then, where a lot of our ancestors are from, that Western Armenia land, is this area where it was a hub of intellectual thought for the Christian church. Also, Saint Sahag's mom was part of the famous Mamagonian family. Her name was Sanctuk, so he has royalty kind of from both sides. And he became the leader of the Armenian church during this golden age. As you could tell, he's extremely educated. And he can be seen as like the band manager, the president of the seminary, the leader of this pack of translators that he brings together to bring in this super important initiative of making sure that Armenians could have a Bible in the language they could understand. And he also dies at the age of 90. So he's the guy on the left. So the guy who gets most of the credit during this time is Meseret Mashtots, and rightfully so. The Armenian tradition is he had a dream, saw the alphabet, and that inspired him to create the alphabet. That could be true, I believe, in revelations like that. I remember during the conference we had at our church, someone was given like a revelatory inspiration to invent something, and it's coming to fruition. So I believe God could work in miraculous ways like that. But the reality is it's probably he went around and learned how to do this. If you look at the script of the Armenian, it's very similar to the ancient Ethiopian text. There's a similarity and a link between Armenian, not that the sounds are the same, but the letterings are similar. And it wasn't just Meseret Mashtots, it was a whole team of translators coming together on this mission to create the Armenian alphabet. And what I love about this team that's gathered, they don't only are successful in creating the Armenian alphabet, the Asvajas Shunch, the breath of God, as we call it, but they also, Meseret Mashtots is the mind behind also creating the Caucasian Albanian alphabet and the Georgian alphabet. Again, it's not just thinking about the Armenians, it's thinking about taking over the region for Jesus Christ. And as we know, the scriptures that was first translated according to tradition is Proverbs 1:2, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Now, this Bible verse captures this golden age of Armenian intellectual thought like no other, that we're going to perceive the words of understanding, that we're going to seek knowledge and seek wisdom. And it's all possible because we now have this technology called the alphabet to remember our history, to create vision, to write goals, to create poetry, to communicate in a way that is we take for granted. But you have to keep in mind, naturally, biologically, like my son is going to naturally learn how to speak and hear if everything is okay. That's it for most of us, right? We could naturally speak and hear. We don't need to go to school to that. Over time, we're going to grow and develop and speak and hear. But being literate, it requires training. It requires something that needs to be learned. And if it has to be learned, it could also be lost because it's not natural. This is important technology that is super critical for human civilization. And we have our literate Bible in the vernacular from the Greek and Aramaic in 400. And this really is the anchor technology, not only to really grow as disciples of Jesus, but to create our own unique culture that is created and solidified in Christian culture. And it's because of these two guys. Now, one of the main books I read for this lesson today is actually from A.A. Badikian, who was the Batvili of the Armenian Evangelical Church of New York for nearly 40 years. This is he wrote this in the 50s. It reads well today. This is the pastor of our church, who was there the longest out of all the pastors. And he talks about the greatness of Mesrop and Sahag. Now, after reading this book, I get why there's a stained glass of these two guys at the church. I was like, we're Protestant. We don't usually do stained glasses of saints. But after reading this book, I understand his appreciation for these two important figures. And he writes this in this work on the Golden Age. The greatness of these two men, Sahak and Mesrop, is characterized by the fact that they felt the urgent need of creating greatness around them. If the teacher is great, the pupil must also be great. And of course, the best evidence of the greatness of the teacher is the greatness of the pupil. They believed in teamwork. The task to which they had put their hands was too big for only two to accomplish. So they invented and trained others to share with them equally the responsibility and glamour of achievements of enduring significance for the life of the nation during their lifetime and for all the time to come. Their greatness was an inspiring greatness, creating a team, getting the job done, and they got the job done, and they ushered in this golden age by surrounding their team with intellectuals, getting them trained in the local cities that had early Christian hubs, getting them together to get the job done. That's leadership. That's unity. That's church. Inspiring greatness. That's discipleship. Love this quote. So who are these disciples of Mesrop and Sahak? One of them that came after is a guy called Yeznik of Kolb, or Esnik. He was a masterclass theologian and Greek philosopher. He did a further edit on the Armenian Bible, and he made our translation from the Greek even better. We have a really, really good translation of the New Testament because of these guys from early on. And it's really important for biblical scholarships to have this point of reference for the validity of the scriptures. That's another topic for another time, but just know how important it is. So Yeznik is one of the disciples of both of these great men. He studied in Edessa and Constantinople. He was an expertise in Greek, and you can read this online. He wrote a section, a book called Against the Sects, sects, like S-E-C-T-S. And in it, he refutes the different worldviews that go against Christian thought. He's like, this is what Christianity is about. This is what you believe. This is why you're wrong. This is why Christianity is right. It's apologetics 101. But his day is not dealing with the secular atheist or what is Islam and the difference between Islam and Christianity. He's not dealing with Islam. He's not dealing with atheists. They didn't exist in his time period. What existed was the problem of evil, which still exists today. If God is good, why do bad things happen to good people? And he actually teaches a very Augustinian method, who's in the West and North Africa. And he's using similar language because he's addressing Zoroastrianism and the Manichaeism. So it's fascinating when the spirit and the orthodoxy of the church is refuting different beliefs. People from different locations could reach similar conclusions. But what I love about Yeznik, he also goes after the Greek philosophers. Plato and Socrates, I have a lot of respect for them. But as the great church father Tertullian said, what does Jerusalem have to do with Athens? A lot of the bad theology that still affects the Western church is when we talk about Jesus and Christianity in Greek philosophical terms and not use Hebrew biblical terms. It's so important to make sure that we are speaking biblically. Again, there's great insights, and all of Western civilization has a lot to be grateful for Socrates and Plato, but when it comes to the religious aspects, they're not teaching Jesus. And he's refuting these great thinkers in this work. It's phenomenal. This is in 441, 449. And the great thing about this, everyone I'm talking about, since we have an alphabet, you can read what they wrote. So Yeznik of Kol, or Esnik, a great thinker. We talked about the historians, Moses Koronatsi, early on, but another great historian, again, all these guys are disciples of this group of two guys, is Yhishiya or Elisha. He wrote the epic Battle of Vartanants. It's very testimony and spiritually written intentionally. It's not just to record history, but it's also to be edifying to the church. So you could read this. You could buy this at an Armenian bookstore. They'll probably entitle it Yhishiya. Usually most of the books from this period are named after the authors. So just type in the author. That there's some good resources. I'll send in a follow-up email with some references so you could read the first primary sources for yourself. Anyway, so actually let's just jump right through that. So you have this period of a golden age where Armenia is becoming more and more Christian. You have this really culture that's anchored in the biblical text that's emerging. Poetry begins, recording of hymns begins, writing of hymns begins, writing of sermons are gathered in Armenian. However, again, we talked about how Armenia is thrown between the Persians and the Byzantines, where most of Armenians were under the Chalcedon rule. And the king of Persia at the time, Yazgard II, created an ultimatum in 438 where Armenians were supposed to adapt to Zoroastrianism and forsake their Christianity. Now, this was a political move. If you want to have an empire, you want to make sure all the people are believing the same thing. So he started with those in his empire. Hey, Armenians, let's go Team Zoroastrianism. I don't want Armenians who are Christians to be maybe siding with the Byzantines. Again, there's always these conspiracies. Where are the Armenians going to side or land with? Are they going to be more Russian, or are they going to be more Middle Eastern? This has always been our story. We're just like, hey, leave us alone. We're thrown in the middle of your nonsense. So back then, it's still the case. And the Persian Empire king was like, all right, Armenians, stop your Christianity, becomes Zoroastrianism. And guess what? It didn't work. And in the work of Yhishiya, there's this back and forth between the priest and the magi, a back and forth that is theological in nature. The magi are the clergy of the Zoroastrian religion, and they talk about their differences in the biblical view of creation. Out from nothing, God created the world, while there's more of this light and dark forces fighting each other, and in Zoroastrianism that they're going back and forth with. There's another back and forth over the lifestyle and the humility and the plainness and modesty that the Christian faith promotes that the Zoroastrians were rejecting. And then the third thing was the virgin birth and the miraculous death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the gospel. So to refute they refuted the first couple of points, but to refute the central message that Jesus came back from the grave and that he was born of the virgin, died and rose, they end their letter with this giant, here you go, authority. From this faith no one can shake us, neither angels nor men, neither sword nor fire nor water nor all horrid tortures. All our goods and possessions are in your hands. Our bodies are before you. Dispose of them as you will. If you leave us to our belief, you will here on earth choose no other master in your place, and in heaven choose no other God in place of Jesus Christ. For there is no other God. But should you require anything beyond this great testimony, here we are. Our bodies are in your hands. Do with them as you please. Tortures from you, submission from us. The sword is yours, the neck ours. We are no better than our forefathers who, for the sake of their faith, surrendered their goods, their possessions, and their bodies. Were we even immortal, it would become us to die for the love of Christ. He himself is immortal and so loved us that he took death on himself, that we by his death might be freed from eternal death. They were like, all right, if we can't convince you, go ahead and kill us. This sets the entire history of Armenia in motion. We're going to be Christians no matter what. And that led to the Battle of Avaride. We celebrate this Vartanants every year. In the spring of 451, 66,000 Armenian troops led by Vartan Mamigonian went up against 300,000 Persian troops. Some There's a debate whether or not there were war elephants. I like to assume that there were war elephants on the Persian side. It makes it more epic. And eventually they lose, but they win the moral victory. They win the right to still fight. They're not forced to convert. They still keep fighting. And for 30 years, there's some skirmishes that continue. Vahan Mamigonian, the nephew of Vartan, Vartan ends up dying in the battle. He takes on the cause. And for 30 years, Armenians are still holding on to their faith, still resisting forced conversion. And eventually, in 484, this is an important treaty, the Treaty of Navarizag, Armenians were legally allowed to practice Christianity in the empire. Amazing free speech, freedom of religion declaration right here. So there you go. Now, is that a happily ever after for the Armenian story? Nope, we're going to keep going in the future. But this is a very important moment where a victory was won, where Christianity will be preserved. Now, you may be thinking, okay, cool. The Armenians were able to resist the Zoroastrianism. Won't that make them buddies with the Byzantine Empire? They're both Christians. And sadly, that's not the case. So the Church Council of Chalcedon in 451 is a very, very important church council. This is a church council that led to the first major split in the church. This is before the Protestant Reformation. This is before the Great Schism between the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church. This is the first major schism in church history, 451. And the debate was over, how is Jesus both God and human? It wasn't denying Jesus' divinity, but it was trying to understand Jesus' divinity. So remember how I talked about how Greek philosophical language gets thrown into the Bible? That's kind of what happened here. This is not a theological lecture. We could talk about this some other time. But the decision was made that Jesus Christ is one person, two natures. He's one body, fully human, fully divine. Now, the Armenians, the Coptics, the Ethiopian, the Syriacs, the Indian Orthodox all said, no, we agree that Jesus has both natures fully. But instead of separating the natures, just call it for some unique, different thing. It's unique. It's the bridge. It's the mediator. Don't. It sounds like you're separating the work of Jesus. Jesus is the bridge between the divine and the earthly, the human and the sacred. Anyway, this is more of a guideline, I believe. But whatever the reason, this led to a split in what is now called Oriental Orthodox. It's definitely not PC to call all these people groups Oriental, but that's what it ended up being called, where you have this split from these Christians and the Roman Empire Christians. And notice that it's more of a political split than a theological one, if I would have to make a defense of that. So look, all the countries in the surrounding region of the Roman Empire get excommunicated, and they're left to be different churches, including the Armenians. Now, the funny thing about all this is what's happening in 451. We were too busy getting murdered by the Persians to even care about attending this council. We didn't show up. We showed up to the other councils, but we couldn't show up to this one. But this made us different than the Byzantines. And throughout our history, we're going to be isolated. We're going to be called a different type of Christian. We're going to be a persecuted Christian. But throughout it all, we're able to persevere because we have our alphabet, we have conversion, we have a culture that is Christ-centered. And throughout our history, you're going to see empires conquer us, whether it's the Soviet Union imposing its atheism, whether it's the Ottoman Empire is imposing its Sunni Islam, whether it's the Mongols just invading. You're going to see this resiliency of our people to uphold our Christianity and to persevere amidst this crazy history that's going to unfold from this moment. But we would not have our identity or our resiliency if it were not for this golden age period of an alphabet and creating a solid Armenian culture that was able to endure its first bout of persecution. So that is the golden age of the Armenian history. It was established in a difficult geopolitical circumstance. It endured hardship because of its geopolitical circumstance, but it established us as a Christian people. We didn't adapt to Zoroastrianism. Very few people practice that religion today, but back in the day, it was a superpower. So times change, but the cross remains, and we still are here, having this Zoom Bible study, being Armenians, being Christians, being yes to Jesus, no to all the other world beliefs. So with that said, I'm going to put an end to this lecture, and I'm going to free it up to Q&A. All right.